Falcon Decan is the time between October 4th and the 12th, approximately. It is a male bird decan ruled by Saturn. It is a danger decan. Again, I like to call them warning decans or floaters. But this one has a lot of interesting, very trackable principles to it from the symbolic standpoint as well as the actual geometry of paintings, drawings, different things going on. But yeah, you have to note with these drawings from 500 CE, I try to notice everything in them. And this one, the big thing is the hand, obviously, and there's some very specific body language. There's a belt loop. There's a lot to this decan, but let's break it down. Start out. This is Lucas Cranach the Younger. He was born October 4th. He says everything with the hand. It's the actual center of the entire painting. So 500 years ago, that's not bad. It's very indicative of what we find all throughout this decan. In fact, that hand is such a specific point of repetitive artistry that in this decan that we can actually, I propose we could actually calibrate, which is what we're doing here, is we're calibrating time with using imagery from artists born during their times. That's actually what I'm doing. I think that's actually the way calendars were originally done, and there's a variety of ways, but none better than the tools we have now, because I wouldn't have access to all these paintings and examples without a computer. I mean, I would have to sit in a library for hours and hours. It can be done in a library. Guy who showed me how to do it was definitely did it with books, but he had mountains of collections of magazines and people's birthdays and calendars all over the place. So, but anyways, let's see if we can calibrate. This is Caravaggio. So Caravaggio is alleged to have been born September 29th, but I'm saying that he wasn't. So now, it was quite a long time ago that he was born. There's a couple reasons why I would say it's very possible that his birth date was off a little bit. One being that his parents died while he was very young. His grandfather and his father both died when he was 6. His mother died when he was 13. So that could put some sketchiness into the air there as far as family business goes, but also the fact that the Gregorian calendar was being changed during the time could have added to some confusion. And then there's this epitaph where his very close friend says, he was born, or he lived a certain amount of time, like this many years, this many months, and 20 days. And I thought, well, 20 days, that's definitely a very round number. It gives me pause. But primarily the symbolism in his paintings. There's the hand in the supper at Emmaus, or Emmaus. This is the Card Sharps by Caravaggio, and there is this element of this decan of the one hidden hand, I'm not going to show you all my cards. That's a big part of the animal symbology, and it's also a big part of the decan as a whole. And So I looked at this and I said, well, there's one aspect right there with the guy with his dagger. I mean, there's a dagger there too. That's kind of a running symbol in this decan as well, although not as prominent as the, I'm not saying cheating at cards, but certainly he's got a hand behind his back there. But then with the musicians, we see this belt loop, or this cloth. It's very specific. It's prominent in the painting. I zoomed in on the painting. This isn't the entire painting, the musicians, obviously. But this is the belt loop, and just the garb, you know. So that's pretty specific, but again, if it only happens once, it's not a big deal. But then with young sick Bacchus, there's that belt loop again, and it's very prominent this time. Like this is a master, so he's including that repetitively in his paintings for a reason. And it definitely matches this decan. It's a very specific thing to match. But also you have this other geometry around his head where, you know, you have these little appendages on the back of the falcon's head, and yeah, I'm saying these drawings from the Hindu, yeah, they definitely can be used as calibration tools. And there's another aspect of this decan of the appreciation of good wine. So he's got the grapes there. That's the pot he wants to fly there. So that's my take on Caravaggio. I think he was probably born somewhere between October 3rd and the 13th, somewhere in there. Maybe just a few days off from what everybody has generally believed. But I don't know. That's my case. That's what I'm doing here with these drawings and the paintings. And let's keep going, see if it carries throughout the rest of these examples. It's a very interesting thing. We're talking about time. All the time in the world was changed when the Gregorian calendar was introduced. It was not well received. It's not what I would consider to be a very good calendar to use compared to a lot of the other calendars in existence that used to be used. Primarily because in any calendar system, in any culture, the 365.25 day year was known, but they didn't. The only thing they use it for is finance. So, but these guys wanted to use the financial calendar for the entire world. But it was introduced October 4th, 1582. So there is an element of continuity in this decan where it concerns world time in different ways. So I think we have the examples to show that. And Pope Gregory, you know, he starts the calendar January 1st. I don't even know if he would start a financial calendar at that time. It's just a bizarre. We'll get into that when we get to that decan. I think you're going to see why he did that, or they. I'm sure it wasn't a unilateral decision, but the reason the calendar starts on January 1st is not what I would consider to be a good reason. But we'll get into that when we do that decan. That's Lotus decan. And that was the decan of Pope Gregory. So he started the calendar on the first day of his decan. So, and then they introduced it on October 4th, because they wanted that pot to fly. And I'm pretty sure they had a good working knowledge of the calendars. Yeah. So what information were they working with when they were doing these things? So the reason De Landa was a priest, he was in in Central America during this time of the incredible abuse of the world's timekeepers, by the way. Nobody argues with the fact that the Maya were keeping time better than almost anybody. So they're looked to as this paragon of timekeeping, and it's absolutely true. I definitely think that the Maya still do have a much better understanding of time and how it works than most of the rest of the world, I think. Although there are certain other countries like China, and of course Egypt had a good understanding, but it's been completely wiped. But yeah, there is an understanding and a subculture across the world of time, and knowing that there's good and bad ways to keep it, and there's a lot of different ways to keep it that most people don't really know about. But anyways, that's what they were doing. They were burning all the books. They burned everything. They took all the knowledge, and they were performing a ceremony when they got all done, or when they wanted to have a ceremony stating they were done, kind of like the victory speech by Bush on the deck of the Iowa there, saying, we're claiming victory today, and then the war goes on for another 15 years. But they decided to have a ceremony, and it was called auto de fe, or act of faith, and in this ceremony they were actually burning the elders. So when they bring reports of, we had to do this, there was all this debauchery. I don't know. You can go down to Guatemala and visit with the people there and ask them, or Mexico, and see what they have to say about it. There's some that dispute this. There's also a dispute about whether or not this guy was acting on his own. That was the final report, was, well, this guy was performing a inquisition by himself. He didn't have permission. Well, there's another story about everything was put on hold until an emissary was sent back to the Vatican, and then returned and said, yes, you need to do this. Because it takes months to do that, right, back and forth. But they were going back and forth. And, yeah, so, I don't know. The whole thing is very suspicious, but there it is, introduced on the 4th of October 1582, 20 years after the ceremony. And I'll put the day of the ceremony there in the Quiche Maya calendar, because I think it's kind of meaningful, and I think these guys were they had taken this knowledge. They took it, and they took it back to Rome, and they've been slowly learning it, using it, whatnot. But I have, yeah, that's a later video, but yeah, I can show they've been using it for sure. Anyway, there's the 3 decans of Libra. Starts out with a set of scales, and that's the inanimate object of, in the zodiac, there's only one sun sign that's depicted by an inanimate object, and that's Libra. But the first decan really is the big time for that, and it is a time of inertia, and it's during the time that they determine value, because this is in agriculture. You bring your crops to the buyer, and then they weigh it, measure it, and then they write it all down. Everybody agrees, and then the delivery happens. Here's your money, and that's the process in the fall every year. And even if you're a farmer doing your own harvest, you get your harvest all done, and then you finally get to see how much you have. Am I going to make it through the winter? What else are we going to need? Maybe I've got too much of this. I can trade some of that, get some of this I don't have enough of, on and on. But there's the functions of the 3 decans going through Libra, and the one in the center is the activity or delivery of determination. In the 36 views of Mount Fuji, Hokusei has it as three guys. I don't think I want to say they're trying to climb that tree. That that doesn't look like three guys trying to climb a tree. Um, it looks more like a spiritual thing going on. It's pretty common across the world when you get into spiritual places. There's a tree. Lebanon, it's the cedars, right? And for the Maya, it's the ceiba tree. Uh, there's usually a sacred tree in every spiritual place you go where these old cultures existed, people with knowledge. And you've even found out, right, that they observed chimpanzees piling rocks at the bottom of a tree, a particular tree in the forest. And they couldn't figure out what this fascination was. And it doesn't surprise me. I think that's been going on for millions and millions of years. It's not tree worship. It's a recognition that all things are connected, and that some places there's certain procedures, spiritual initiations, moving into somebody else's territory, all kinds of things. But I'm saying the object of the decan is the one sitting down in a contemplative pose there. And Mount Fuji they look rather high up, so this is I'm going to say it's a good depiction of a spiritual place. Hokusei was not a dumb man, and there's a lot about trees. It's the other two decans of Libra in Hokusei's 36 views. They are at number 18 and 19 because that's the proper place for them in sequence with the process of unfoldment in the pantheon. But the four warning decans, because we're talking about a warning decan, Falcon is number 33, and it's 33 in most systems, not all, but a few. But in this one, there's the scales. These guys there's no reason to be up on the prow of the ship like that. That's not where you steer the ship. I mean, I suppose you could, but it's kind of a bizarre. He's obviously pointing out that this is a point of balance. And the view on the right is monkey decan. And here we have what could be a little bit of a dispute going on. One guy's wiping his head to indicate all the work is done. There's a pile of stuff. And one guy in the center of the room, the object of the drawing, is chiseling into stone, which is what Hermes or Thoth does, right? This is the decan of Thoth and Hermes. It's one of them for Hermes. It's Mercury, ruled by Mercury. But he's writing it down. He's keeping a record. And when you're putting it into stone, you're making a permanent record. It won't burn up. You can't lose it. It's a permanent record. In the Egyptian system, this is a very common drawing, and I've always said that there it is. That's the decans of Libra. The Egyptians knew the decans really, really well. And there's a reason why the jackal decan is right there. And what I'm saying is the last decan of Virgo is the swallow, and that's who's coming into the scales, but it's really the feminine, because Libra is bordered on either side by feminine decans. There's two female decans in Virgo and two female decans in Scorpio. So, and right in the middle of them is Libra. So this is what I consider to be a pretty obvious portrayal of the elements of Libra and the process of time. So there's the scales, there's Thoth, and there's the Falcon delivering because he's a warning decan, doesn't always stay in his place. He can move around. He can show up anywhere. But that's pretty point blank. When we do monkey decan, I think you're going to see. But there's that arm again. There's the hand motion of the Falcon, and that's what's going on. That's beautifully depicted if you're studying time and symbology and repetitive geometry of the people born during that time. What are they all about? In the Dendera, these are the 3 decans of Libra. The circle with the 8 figures inside is the first decan of Scorpio, and that's the house of death, or the portal, as I might call it. But there's all the people sitting down, right? But right in front of it there's Thoth, and then there's the falcon-headed figure with the small animal, and then there's the first decan of Libra, which is scales, and it simply has a round, faceless head. And as we go around all these decans, you're going to see these can be calibrated, because there are enough animals. There's a lot of human figures on the Dendera, but there's enough animals that these can be definitely proven. And on the picture on the right hand side shows where it is when the calendar's in its static position. Now this is that bottom decan with the falcon, or the hawk, or bird sitting on top of the call it a pointer. Up to the left there is, I put a question mark where there used to be a decan there. Most images you see of the Dendera do not have that decan included, and that's very important, because you'll lose count if you don't count that one. And the first recognizable animal is a bear, and that's number 14. So, but when there was a man who was the first one to rediscover this calendar. He did an etching of it, and when he did the etching, there was a decan there, but when the stone got to France, that decan was not there, and it is actually the 3rd decan of Gemini, which is Phoenix. But another important thing to watch here with this calendar is look at their hands. The falcon's hands, everybody's hands, they're holding up world time. But it's not a star map. A lot of people say, it's a star map. Look, this is where the stars are. They could easily have made a star map, right? You could put the little stars on there. So I don't think they were that dumb. I think if they wanted to make a star map, they'd make a star map. But this is not a star map. This is a map of symbology, and the more you see, the more you find that out. The more you study it from the perspective of what are these people creating that are born during these times. What is the imagery that comes up over and over and over? On the left is my drawing called The Family, and where I have Falcon Decan in relationship to that image from Egypt, which I'm saying is the depiction of the decans of Libra, you'll see Jackal is actually positioned at the top next to Swallow Decan. Now, his quadrant for the 4 warning decans, they each kind of roam around their quadrant. Jackal roams around that upper left quadrant, Falcon roams around that upper right quadrant, Wagon roams around the bottom right quadrant, and Yogi roams around in that bottom left quadrant. So that's why you won't always see Falcon in its place, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things to it. But where he is positioned between Falcon and Yogi, straight across there in these combined systems, the inner system is the 20 days, starts with Bots and ends with Z, and the exterior system is the decans. There is a continuity of symbolism and call it congruency that goes through there. There's a lot of birds right through the center from right to left. There's birds all the way across there. So that's one of the calibration things, and it's not without a lot of study that I put these here, because I found that in the various ways of determining these things, that's where they belong. That's where their fixed positions come through the strongest, but their actual occurrence does not happen there. So that's a little complicated, but it's true. On the right is the codex stolen from the Maya. That was renamed the Borgia Codex. How'd you like that, right? What if somebody came in and took your stuff, right, and then named it after their family? But whatever. This is the days starting in the upper left is Bod's. Right below the appendage there, it's got the circle around it with the figure has a sword stuck into the circle. That's Bod's. So the days go around like that. Then in the center you have these 32 segments, and then in the very center you have 4 warning decans depicted by 2 intertwined serpents making a mouth, and then 2 birds up on the top making the eyes. It's a very good depiction. It's easy to interpret even if you're not from that culture. If you study time with these different systems, it's a very good depiction. Whoever wrote that down and passed it forward did a good job. So it's not super hard to decipher. There's the unlabeled portion of the family, and there's the labeled, the fully labeled portion, except for the 4 elements on the inside. The brown is obviously earth, the red is fire, the yellowish green is water, and the blue is the air. So there it is, fully labeled, and these are put together because they fit. They fit just like that. That's where they fit. And these elements, for instance, if you go to Aries, it has the 1 on it, the red circle with a 1. Below that are the 3 decans of Aries. And between that are the last 2 days. And so if I take that section of pi and start looking at all those times, you will find a common thread. But let's keep going with... So there is something to the world time that happens. Not clockmakers so much, but definitely world time. October 9th is the anniversary of the world's oldest working astronomical clock. I don't know why they have it at October 9th. I don't think they know anymore. They just do it. But they had the 600th anniversary of this clock in 2010, and I'm going to put a link in the descriptor because it is an amazing light show, like a projection type light show that they do onto the front of this building. And of course the climax is the clock chimes, and so it's still working, and there it is. It's very impressive. It's an interesting piece of work, and I don't know, it's a very cool video. I'll put that link in the descriptor. It's something I didn't even know existed, but there it is. So the element of the balance put from the inert to the active is Elmer Sperry, where he have the patent for the gyrocompass. He's considered the father of modern navigation technology. So he built this gyrocompass, and the big picture is where they're installing it on a ship, a big one. That's a big one. But this is the element of the wobbling balance. It has more to do with balance than it has to do with the function of time, but certainly for direction. You need to know the directions to know time, because it's a very important element of being able to keep time, is knowing your directions. But Elmer Sperry, definitely a progenitor. Now there was a controversy where there was another guy, So, oh yeah, I think this other guy did it first. There was a guy in 1906 who did it first, so I said, okay, let's go look at him. Well, he was born on October 3rd, so that's right in there. He's on the cusp. As a matter of fact, they were the first ones to manufacture it. They just didn't file a patent. So here's these two guys have a dispute, but guess what? They're born in the same decan, so I figure that's a lock. So the gyrocompass is a type of scale, and it is made to go move around. This is not a static directional device. This is a device to determine direction while you're moving around, or if it's not on a stable surface. So that is the inert balance of scales going to the active balance, which can be moved around. It moves around. There's another aspect of this decan, is moving around. Here's the 3 cards. Here's another controversy. I don't have a problem, and we're going to show the examples, because those are the 3 cards of Libra in the tarot, published by Pamela Coleman Smith. And I'm going to touch back on this in an example in a few minutes, because she published this in 1909 after quite a few people who would have known about this type of information were around, and it really didn't take me too long to figure these cards out. And actually, my wife kind of figured out the basic layout of the major arcana are easy because that's the 20 days, but the lesser tarot was a little more muddy because she didn't do a great job. She wasn't fully trained, and she had the encumbrance of having to work with these items. Like, you've got to put these items in the card. It's like, okay. I mean, it'd be nice if you could just work, if you were working like with the Hindu or Hakusei, he doesn't have this burden of having to use a certain number of items and, associating a number, but that's how they figured it out. So the 10, 9, 8 are the cardinal signs. So these are the 10, 9, 8 of swords. And the middle one is Libra. And everybody, the sorrows. Yeah. That's definitely a part of Falcon Decan, as you'll see in a moment. In the I Ching, Falcon Decan, every single line in it talks about the difficulties. The difficulties and the difficulties. Then you're going to have some even greater difficulties, and then this is going to lead to some more difficulties, and you're just going to have some difficulties, and you might have some friends coming to help you, but you got some difficulties, and but there's going to be good fortune, and you get it. It will be advantageous to meet the great man. And then the opening, the symbol, the actual meaning of the hexagram is the advantage found in the southwest and the contrary in the northeast. Now that's pretty interesting. So I don't know that their directions in China always mean the same thing. Directions can kind of change as you go around the world. If you've ever seen the way toilets flush the opposite way in the southern hemisphere, it's very interesting stuff. But so I'm not completely cued in on the meaning of the directions, but they kind of fit in this instance. But the difficulties are the more prominent point of this descriptor, and it is definitely Falcon Decan. The Chinese, this is the only one of the 4 decans they did not list at the end. I don't know why they left it in there. They could have done that just to, like, the hidden hand. And most of these cultures will have like one obvious error in the sequence that looks pretty purposeful, just because there's this willingness to keep, don't give them all our information. It's kind of like that. It's proprietary cultural information, so they just make you work for it a little bit, that's all. So Mahatma Gandhi was born October 2nd, and he's considered the father of modern India, but he started out by going to London, and while he was there in London, he was like, I think 20 years old, maybe 18 when he went to London. while he was there, he was in a vegetarian society, and some of the people in that vegetarian society were later a part of, or even at that time, a part of the Theosophical Society, which commissioned Pamela Coleman Smith to do those cards. So I'm just saying there's a great deal of possibility that they knew the decans. Gandhi certainly would have known them. He'd studied the Hindu literature throughout his entire childhood, up to the point where he went to London. That was pretty much all he studied. So I would be very surprised if he didn't perhaps convey some of that information while he was there, or maybe even other people too. It is a pretty unique study. I don't know how unique it is in the Hindu culture to study the stuff, but Gandhi was there before, in the years prior to the Theosophical Society, and later on Pamela Coleman Smith publishing those cards. So, but he dealt with the difficulties upon difficulties upon difficulties. When he went to South Africa, he was brutally oppressed. He was a victim of horrifying racism, even though he was a member of the British Bar. And so, yeah, he had difficulties, and he was always being attacked by both sides. So, on one hand, he was trying to support people against racism, and at the other side, he was trying to mediate with these oppressors. So he caught flack from both sides. He ended up being killed by someone who was on his side, basically, maybe a different faction, but it was somebody on his side, right? Thich Nhat Hanh, there's a pair, right there is a pair of guys that are masters of mediation and protest. Now, Gandhi is the inert going to the active. He actually took the concept of nonviolent protest. In other words, we're not going to do anything, but we're going to protest. So if they beat on us, we can't fight back, we just take it. Or, we're just going to sit down, or we're going to do the Salt March. But it was a nonviolent, inert type of protest that was actually active. And Thich Nhat Hanh, born in the same decan, he coined the term engaged Buddhism. And he actually also very much active with inertia. He brings inertia to an activity, and yeah, he wasn't, he was kicked out of Vietnam in 1975, wasn't able to return. He's now home, went home in 2018, so he's still alive. He's in his 90s, but this was a very highly respected spiritual representative of the activist community, right? And Vietnam was definitely full of troubles. Troubles and difficulties and difficulties and troubles. Constant. Desmond Tutu, more difficulties. Same area as when Gandhi first went to South Africa, but Desmond Tutu, he's got multiple conflicts he's mediating between. He was trying to, aside from apartheid and all this stuff too, he was also incorporating African theology into Christian theology, which I don't know how he gets, that's great that they're trying to do that, but I don't know, I don't have an opinion on any of that. I don't think that Christians have anything too real. I think there's just mostly an amalgamation of all the stuff they gathered from around the world. So they're definitely found, and I'm sure many people, I would include Tutu, probably knows this too, there's a ton of ancient African stories in there. So there's stories from everywhere in there. But yeah, he said you're either on one side or the other. You can't be neutral. But then these guys try to be as neutral as they possibly can, but it's very difficult. You have to take a side. So there's more difficulties. So there's another one, Jesse Jackson. So you see this trend of difficulties. The I Ching always deals with the very primal, and it shows up. But Jesse Jackson, dreams must be free to fly high. So that's the pot that he wants to fly. There's the hand gestures. He's a very good phone number to have if you are a victim of racism and you are being oppressed due to this. That is probably the number one phone number in the United States you would want to have if that were the case, if that was your situation. And he responds. He's an activist, but he's nonviolent. John Lennon, I would classify him as a nonviolent activist as well. Definitely had a musician thing going on. The stories of him as a child are very interesting, where he was an agitator. So when he went to his friend's house, he was definitely stirring things up and agitating and fomenting trouble between his friends and their parents, and everybody kind of knew it. So that was kind of an interesting aspect. I find that to be that's pretty accurate. Yeah, I think there's a lot of guys that do that in this decan. They can, if they're born an activist, you're born an activist. You immediately spot this stuff. Probably by the age of like 12 or 13, you're saying, "Oh, the hell with my parents," and that was kind of the case. He was raised by 5 women, but he's born in Falcon Decan. I thought it was interesting. There's 3 guys by the tree, and the one guy sitting down, and I think the photograph here captures this essence of just a pretty simple observation that John Lennon was the leader of the band, and yeah, so one of the overarching messages is give peace a chance. Eleanor Roosevelt, more difficulties. Oh, I should have mentioned, yeah, John Lennon also shot and killed by one of his own fans. That's a very similar fate as Gandhi, so I did take notice of that. I don't know if there's anything to it. I have to find more examples of that, but they definitely have very similar, there's a lot of similarity between all those examples and this one. Eleanor Roosevelt, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She has an interesting clay pot story, because wishing the clay pot would fly. So back in the day, there was a thing called the teapot scandal, and her cousin was running for office in New York, and she was so mad at him and opposed to his politics that and the way he had handled and been involved with the teapot scandal, she made a giant papier-mâché teapot, put it on her car, and hounded him at his rallies and protested against her own cousin. But this is a woman who made her way around the world. I would say she was definitely one of the most powerful women in the world for quite a while, and she was integrally involved with the Declaration of Human Rights at the UN. It's very interesting, the hand gestures where she's holding her hands, and it's a very purposeful pose for a picture on the left. The one on the right is the actual portrait of her that is at the White House, I believe. And I mean, I just find that to be very indicative of Falcon Decan, and whoever did it, they did a great job. I didn't find out that. I just she's my example, so I didn't want to tape that, but she did a lot of appearances for her husband because he was in a wheelchair, and this was a lady who got around, and She wasn't always right. She had detractors on both sides, again, but she was always trying to promote peace and fair treatment of human beings. That I feel pretty confident about saying. And this is Nicholas Delargier. Yeah, Delargier. Very famous painter. That's his self-portrait. This is another thing. You always look at the self-portraits, but there's the self-portrait with his left hand gesturing the same way we see it everywhere. And on the right is his painting, The Study of Hands, or A Study of Hands. And I just think it's really important because that's his self-portrait, and we definitely know he was very much studying hands, and I found a lot of similarity between that and Eleanor Roosevelt's portrait. But even if it's done by a different painter, doesn't matter, because that's their job, is they try to see your soul and do your portrait. But that's the job of a portrait artist. But this guy did his own portrait, and that's what he did, so that's how we know. And there he is. So that's just another example. It just keeps going. You just keep seeing all these hands, the hands, the hands. And there's his very specific posing, very specific gesture. Faith Ringgold is a activist, artist, you could say political artist, but she's not afraid to mix it up. She's been known to fight for justice in the art community, and the quilt on the left is the story of a young girl named Cassie, and she has a dream of flying. So I thought, well, there's her pot. She wants the spirits of these young black kids to fly. She's trying to raise the spirits of her people, and but she's also not afraid to mix it up and show tragedy, and don't forget the oppression. So the image on the right is kind of hard, but it's important. So I think she puts it all together as an activist and an artist, and she's very interesting. I think she's knows herself very, very well, which is the key to taking your art and getting into these other things. The center image, I thought, wow, that's interesting. That's a very unique posture of the legs, but poignant, and the garb as well. So I thought and she's pretty attentive to clothing, so I thought, wow, that's really interesting, and it is. It's a very good, just her picking up on those aspects once again. And the one on the right is hands, the hands in the air and all types of gestures, but the one right in the center is that gesture. Though it's reaching upwards a little bit, it's still that gesture. And then the photograph of her, which I'm looking at the photograph, and I think she took that pretty seriously. Obviously, this is a portrait, a photographic portrait of her, and she's wearing her own art, which is impressive enough. But where did she choose to sit? And when you have an artist that's mastered herself like she has, she didn't just randomly say, how about over here? She chose that spot. That's probably her favorite spot, where she felt that she belonged, is at the tree line with a little shed in the background. So we'll see. We're going to see if that pops up again. I noticed that was a common theme throughout this decan as well. So, but her most poignant thing, that's what flying is. It's a determination to do something that seems almost impossible. That nails it for this decan. That just nails this decan. So I've got a lot of respect for all of her art and her mind. She's a sharp one, that one. Hans Heysen, this is what he did. He just kept drawing those trees over and over. So here's the tree from Hokusei. Really, I mean, it's up in the hills a lot of times, right? Shows it like up in an elevated position. There's this large old tree, if the old tree could talk, kind of thing, you know. And he just painted this over and over and over and over. I've got 5 images here. I could probably find about 150 more just like it. This was his recurring thing. This is what he was famous for, and he was good at it. He got several awards. He's an Australian painter, and I think there was one award he won 7 times. So, and he's doing it with watercolor, which, you know, I'm not a real big painter, but watercolors are terrifying. You can't fix them. Wolf Kahn, he's another one, just trees over and over and over. And the image on the bottom right, I thought, look at that. It's the same. It's just so similar to where Faith Ringgold put herself. And I don't know. It is a cozy spot for a falcon. You're kind of not down by the buildings, but you can see them. You can see the forest through the trees, kind of thing. It's an old saying. There's a lot of there's a balancing routine that goes on with a tree too, isn't it? It's kind of like it's the base of the scale, and when it's windy, the tree's blowing back and forth. A lot of association with the wind, with a lot of things in this decan. Guido Molinari is he's a very interesting guy. When I looked at his style, I said, well, look, he takes the trees, and he just, I just see trees in those lines, those vertical lines. It's like trees. And I thought that collage at the top there, I really like the circles. I'm big into that too, and I'm in this decan, so I'm very drawn to that type of geometry, and that's I do it repeatedly actually, and I like what he has to say here. Just listening carefully to what the musicians are really doing, putting the music in the right time, I became aware of the degree to which time, and therefore duration, was important in music and in art. It had a direct influence on my painting. So here's a guy who's actually incorporating the element of time and periodicity and duration into his painting, but it's active and yet inert, isn't it? So again, he follows the themes pretty well. I thought, well, up in the upper left, even when he gets, I guess you could call that a little wild, he kind of looks like the hand. It's a very interesting example. This is one of the first examples I found years ago in this decan where I said, oh, that's it. That's the only one I need right there, because the descriptor in the Hindu of wishing it could fly. He wants that clay pot to fly, and there's a recurring theme in a lot of this too about the clay shards, the pot shards. Okay, this is also in Christian literature. The pot shard is definitely Job is this decan, but the pot shard and the clay pot, he wants it to fly. So Art Clokey knew this, and he really did this. He accomplished this as an artist. So he brought this character, Gumby, to life, and he moved, and it was claymation. He was really the preeminent claymation artist of our time, and of course there's this aspect of the dog that goes with Davy and Goliath, and Goliath is really the voice of the conscience of Davy is Goliath, right? Goliath is the one who says, yeah, I don't know, I don't think we should do that, or Yeah, here's what we need to do. The dog was definitely the smarter, uh, and that's the dog from the scales in the Egyptian. Okay, and there's a reason for that. We'll get to that when we do scales decan. I'll tell you why that animal stays there, but then it goes with Falcon Decan. It follows Falcon Decan because on top of making sure what's going on at the scale, you also have to make sure that the money being handed through the window is correct as well, and the people aren't being oppressed, and so there's definitely an association with that animal with the maintenance of justice, and it ties into the dialectic of things. But there's a reason that animal's at the scales, and this is very much the representation of that in Falcon Decan. Nopey is a dog who he can only say nope or no, and so his name is Nopey, and so that's the dog Nopey that goes with Gumby and Pokey. But he brought the clay to life. He did it. It's beautiful, and his themes are pretty interesting too. He's got some very interesting themes. I'll put one in the descriptor of Gumby Goes to Hopi Land. I thought that was pretty interesting. Here's Alberto Giacometti. He's not a small artist. There's the #1 and #2 highest selling, highest priced sculptures in the world. But there's the hand, you see. So Giacometti, to me, he's this artist that takes himself and boils it in a pot until all the water's gone, and then he looks and sees what's left. So he's a minimalist, and he's very deliberate. So that's a pretty, he's pretty focused and steady. So he's a great example for this decan. Now the Walking Man, that pertains to his day also. So all these artists, they will have stuff in their decan, but not necessarily. Some of these guys, including Cometti, well, the really good ones, the masters like this, they have both, or all three different. They'll have at least three different cycles in their art. But Giacometti, the Walking Man, is he'll be used as an example in the days. So, but the Pointing Man and the hand above his head are definitely very much right in line with this decan. Niels Bohr is a physicist who gave us the model of the atom, right? And I just think that's just incredible example of going from the inert to the active, in that you start out with a two-dimensional static display of the atom, and then but now you've got to do the mathematics to show how it becomes active and what happens after that. So he did that beautifully, and it's also the correspondence principle. Just that is very much a timestamp in this decan, and the principle of complementarity. That's another, right? These things all apply. Here he's doing it with math and science. Gandhi did it with activism, right? Thich Nhat Hanh can help other people do that in their mind, right? On and on and on. But quantum mechanics, he's very right. If it hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. And I would say the same thing about this type of stuff, what I'm showing, because a lot of people don't realize this exists, and even artists don't want to admit it. They feel a little threatened by this. Like, yeah, no, that's my idea. Anyway, he has imagery, which also really helps, because just sitting down and going through equations is not very conducive to this study. The one thing I can do is look at what the product was. What's the end product, right? So I don't get into a bunch of scientists that provide theories and this and that. This guy produced stuff, but where his artistry comes in, which is very interesting, he designed his own family shield there, and I see the semicircle banner is very much right. I mean, that is a dead match for the scales, as is the pointed, right? See the pointed chin on the figure in scales, and then the I Ching symbol in the center, or not the I Ching. That's the duality, the symbol for duality in the center. But the shield is balanced on a point, on a curve, in an egg, whatever. I just think it's very, with an elephant under it. It's a great piece of artistry from a scientist, and so I was very, 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 very pleased to find that. He's a great example, taking from inert to active. John Lennons, I think I said that right. He brought the inert to active to autonomous. Same thing as, really, if you compare this to Art Clokey. People in the beginning, they're looking at these electronic devices and saying, wow, wouldn't it be great if it could operate on its own? Wouldn't it be great if it could just do some stuff by itself? Wouldn't it be great if we could just animate this machine and have it live on its own? And so he did. He made the first electronic digital computer. And again, it's from inert to active, autonomous. Now here's the traveling around aspect and also the navigational aspect. So it kind of all ties together with this guy, his product. What did this guy do, right? So that's all I'll look at is, what do these people do? So we have the gyrocompass, we have the moving around, we have the keeping of history, the keeping of the scales, what's going on, defense of the oppressed. So with this information going all the way back to the calendars back there, by the way, we have this question of, well, were people traveling across the oceans before the Pope said so? Of course, and most people around the world, certainly all the old cultures, yes, they very much agree that, yes, there was people going all over the place, and there's tons of evidence for it. But I mean, certainly in my field with the calendars, there is definitely evidence that everybody had the same knowledge, and it doesn't look like it looks like they all developed it to their own individual cultures, but they all had the same information, and it matches. And then you have the way the dendera fits with the zodiac. The dendera fits with the Aztec sunstone. That's like, now that's not a geometrical mistake. That's very, very purposeful, and they expected somebody to find that. That's the way I feel about it. Anyway, this guy wanted to prove it, so he did. He took a raft made from the raw materials, as people would have had at the time, and went 4,300 miles in 101 days on Kon Tiki. That's actually moving pretty good. 4,300 miles in 101 days. That's not bad. And then he did it again from Morocco to Barbados with a boat made out of basically grass. Papyrus is like grass, right? I mean, it's like grass reeds. And they actually did it twice. The first time they were 100 miles short. So for 4,000 miles, he's 100 miles short. Yeah, it's like, okay. But it was a simple little mistake they made with the design of the boat. They didn't follow the original instructions with one little piece of to attach that prow to keep it up like that. And so then they did it the second time, worked out beautifully, and they made it. So he did it, and even though he was only 100 miles short, he went back and said, no, we're doing this again. We're going to make sure we do it this time. So he did it, and I think it's pretty obvious. If you throw a boat into the ocean off the coast of West Africa, you will land in the Caribbean, or maybe even up into the Mexico, I don't know, all up and down Central America, and that's exactly where the Olmecs landed, and that is exactly what the Maya have said, is we got this information 6,000 years ago from the Olmecs, but we ourselves are survivors of Atlantis. So there's quite a bit going on with people moving around. Here's a couple of actresses, both born in October, Falcon Decan. So they're within 4 days of each other. Some people think they look alike. They've been mistaken for each other out in public. So I think that's, it's always interesting. But people, not everybody has really good facial recognition. I mean, I don't think they're that hard to tell apart myself. But, and not to mention, Sigourney Weaver's like, I think, 8 inches taller than Susan Sarandon. But people that watch movies, they don't know that. You don't know how tall the people are until you see them in real life. But either way, they've been confused. The quote is from a speech made at an award, an acceptance of an award at Glamour magazine, where they both won awards. So it was mentioned. But what's more interesting, and why these ladies tie into this. Now, Sigourney Weaver as an artist is pretty accomplished, and yeah, she did the Alien movies and all that, and that's very, that's all good, and that's moving around, traveling around, right, running into troubles, difficulties, but that's not the real pinnacle of her acting. The real big thing that I see that's just amazing and off the charts is her role and her position and her task that she did in Avatar. What was she doing? She was protecting the sacred tree. And she was protecting the sacred tree because as a scientist, she was leading the team that was studying, saying, hey, wait a minute, you can't kill this tree. This is like a mother tree. Everything's connected here. Now, that's something that's well known in other cultures, and that's why there's these very specific trees, and even chimpanzees know this. But you see, humanity has become so disconnected, they don't believe it anymore. They're too, we've got to get those minerals out of there. That tree's in the way. But she defended the tree, and that was her role in that movie, and I thought that's exactly, and now that, I'm showing her at the end just to make that point, because now when you look back at all these examples, and you'll see that's it's a part of this whole decan, and who better to protect the tree than a falcon, right? Trees are also symbols of time, worldly time. So then, Susan Sarandon, I think her major role that I think really ties in, although she's got quite a few, but the one that stuck out to me was her role as a nun on death row in Dead Man Walking. So she counsels a man through a very difficult thing. I mean, she's dealing with difficulties upon difficulties, and she's actually handling that, and she was actually successful from a spiritual standpoint if you observe it from that standpoint. She helps that person die in peace. She couldn't prevent his death, but she helped him die in peace. And that's that aspect of the spiritual service where you're dealing with difficulties upon difficulties upon difficulties. That's what Lennon was doing. That's what Gandhi was doing. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh was doing. That's what Tutu was doing. That's what Eleanor Roosevelt was doing. And you always get attacked from both sides, and you're always in the middle of things, and it's just the way it goes. That's bringing the determination of the scales means that if you're going to be the messenger, well, guess what? There's a lot of people that might want to shoot the messenger. So, in Genesis, the chapter that is Falcon Decan is also number 33. It's the return of the prodigal brother. It's like the reunion of the twins. There's another reason for that. the reunion of the twins because it actually comes back to that aspect of the animal at the scales. The reunion of the twins goes back to the story of Gilgamesh and all this other stuff, but the reunion of the twins, the peace between brothers, and 17 through 20 is the travels, and it's like, and he went there, and he went there, and he went there, and then he had a ceremony, and it's exactly 20 days. So the chapter in Genesis that is Falcon Decan is exactly 20 days, and it's a great example for showing that not only did these guys know, whoever was writing that knew the 20 days, they also knew the decans, and there's elements of all those things in each one of those verses, all 20 in a row. So either way, and the decan throughout. So the primary focus of that chapter is the decan, but it definitely also follows the days. It's very complex literature, but it's not that hard in that chapter because it's only 20. It's exactly 20, and it's very much, these guys thought, oh man, they were going to kill each other, and all of a sudden, oh, here we are. Yeah, oh, it's no problem at all. There's peace. Yeah, look at all the troubles, all the difficulties, but now all of a sudden there's peace. Isn't that beautiful? So that's Genesis 33. That's Falcon Decan. So is Numbers. In Numbers, it's just this repetitive, and this is why Numbers is the 36 decans, but it's not a great book. It's not a great book, I'm going to say. It could be so much better, but it's very repetitive, and it goes on and on. But either way, it's the catalog of the travels, and there's this guy, and he went over here, and then he stayed over here, and then he picked it up over there, and then he went over here. Then he stayed over here for this amount of time, and he went over here, and he stayed there, and then he went over there, and he went over there, and went over there. And that's what all these guys do. And that's what it's like reading the stories these guys do, like Gandhi, reading Gandhi's story. And even Lennon's. Look at Lennon. You think that guy didn't travel? This was at the really the contraception of the mass world touring stage of music, right? When the Beatles came to America, holy macaroni and cheese, right? But yeah, it's the catalog of the travels, so that's it. Now this point comes up all the time, and there's a reason why these warning decans, so in particular the warning decans, I can find the art of them in other people that are not born in the time occasionally, and the way I'm able to calibrate this and the work of it is that you have to find out what inspired you to do this drawing. Is this do they have a continuity of this stuff? No. So when I saw this painting and I found out Priscilla's birthday, I said, well, you're not in this day, so where did you get the idea for this painting? And she said, well, it was a part of my dream series. So this was actually a dream. And so she's born in that decan of oyster right next to where I positioned Falcon on there. And I've got more examples for this in oyster and metal, both decans right there, and the days on either side of those for all four of the warning decans. That's how it's done. And you'll see an artist where they have very, very steady line of the image on the right is a mural she did in Philadelphia. I like her a lot. She's an activist, she's a friend, and she's an artist. And so yeah, she's doing murals in Philadelphia. They're about to do something pretty good, I guess. But the image on the left, she just nails Falcon Decan. Look at the trees in the background, right? The hand gesture is it's really. She could have just done just the hand, but that hand is a very prominent and poignant thing. So when I saw that, I said, I'll bet you $20 if that person isn't born in that decan, you won't see that going on the entire time. And sure enough, she's provided that example. I got a lot of other examples. I like to use living artists as well. So she's living and doing art in Philadelphia. I'll put a link in the descriptor to her stuff. Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot. See you later.